Years after the Second World War, the tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States were expressed in the form of the Cold War. These fault lines were mainly due to ideological differences. The US represented a liberal democracy, while the Soviet Union was committed to communism. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was the derivative of this very Cold War. Until 1959, Cuba was a satellite state of US under the dictatorial regime of the Batista government, which won the state over by a military coup funded by the CIA, the intelligence agency of the US. But nonetheless, in 1959, the famous Cuban revolutionist Fidel Castro was successful in his quest to free Cuba from US hegemony by ousting the Batista government, and he now headed the state. But note, this was against US interest since Castro had communist ideologies. So as you can imagine, from there on the US tried to depose of the Castro regime multiple times in order to secure its own strategic interest. One of such attempts in which the US was involved was the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was a great blunder and unsuccessful in overthrowing the Castro regime. Consequently, Castro wrote to Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at that time, pleading him to deploy nuclear missiles to deter US from carrying out such attacks. Now, the Soviet Union was more than happy to comply with Cuba's request, since they were themselves threatened by the US nukes which were deployed in their backyard in Turkey and Italy. The deployment of Soviet Union's nukes in Cuba just completed the equation of a military strategy called nuclear deterrence. You can search it up. And thanks to USA's surveillance capabilities, it was able to identify Soviet-style military buildup, confirming the presence of Soviet nukes in Cuba. Following this, John F. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade around Cuba. But note that such actions in international politics are considered as a straightforward act of war. So you can imagine how the tensions between the US and the USSR increased manifold along this time. On-ground escalations added to the strife. On October 27, 1962, an American spy plane was shot by USSR's nukes. And on the same day, a miscommunication between a US naval ship and a Soviet nuclearly armed submarine almost got the world on the brink of a nuclear war. The US naval vessel communicated to the Soviet submarine to surface by releasing a small depth charge. But the submarine, which had absolutely no communication with anyone, took it as the sign that the war had begun. The decision to attack and retaliate via a nuke lied completely on the shoulders of 3 officers of the submarine, out of which only one disagreed to attack. But this disagreement certainly saved them from taking a wrong turn, which would have had a tremendous impact on humanity. Covertly, diplomatic channels between the US and the Soviet Union were thankfully open, and they managed to come to a deal in which the US agreed to remove the nukes from Italy and Turkey. In return, the USSR would do the same in Cuba, basically a mutual missile withdrawal deal. This deal, in fact, was revealed to the public after many years, as the JFK administration wanted to hush up any such deals with the USSR. But either way, it is an achievement that this crisis was solved diplomatically, considering the fact that the world was only a few minutes away from striking midnight in the metaphorical doomsday clock.